God, help. In Jesus' name, amen. That's all our prayer needs to be with our children. God, help. And praying has to be hand in hand when we're bringing up our kids. Now, I've got to go very fast through here. Psalm 139. Hang on, I've got a clicker here. Here it is. Did you do that?
Magic.
Psalm 139. This is straight out of the Bible. So I haven't made this up. This is from our Lord God. Lord, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and that I know full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. All the days are ordained for me. All the days that were ordained for me are written in your book before one of them came to be. So we all think, don't we, that we're very clever and we've made our children. And some of them have been planned and some of them were surprises. I, myself, was a surprise. My children were planned, but I was a very big surprise. My parents were 16 when I decided, or maybe God said or something, that I should be coming into the world. But I want to tell you, the children of today, this is about bringing up children in the 21st century. Our children, their identity is under attack. That is number one. They don't know whether they're boys or girls or what they're meant to be. And actually, quite honestly, they can be whatever they want, just with words. So their identity is coming under attack, hard and fast. And you, as the parent, need to teach and show them who they are. In the world, our kids are going to experience rejection, disappointment and failure. That is a given, and maybe you experience that. But in our homes, whether you are a single parent or whether you are a blended family or step families, whatever your home is, they need to know that they are loved, that they are accepted, and that they are encouraged. Now, as a parent, I want to ask you, what are you parenting from? The brokenness or the healing place of Jesus? Because many of us parent from our brokenness, and that must cease. So you need to start a journey of finding healing of who you are. Although this is about parenting, you also are parented. And I would say to you, totally and absolutely, your parents did the very best they could. But they were also parented, maybe out of brokenness. The brokenness has to cease, and we have to start parenting out of the love of Jesus. You need to do some reading, a few books. There must be millions of books in the world. All children are individual. All parents are individual. But you must start training yourself to be a better parent. And remember the prayer that we prayed. God, help. That's all it has to be. There are lots of different types of kids. Here we go. Oh, look at this. This is good. There are doers. They want to do everything and help everybody and help the family. There's enablers. They enable things to be smoothed out in the home. There's loners. Sometimes they are a little bit emotionally low in their loneliness. You have to encourage that. There's stars. There's the hero of the family. Makes everybody look good. And you can rely on them to be the star. As I'm saying these things here, these categories of kids, you were a kid. Which one were you? There's the joker, the clown that makes everybody laugh and covers over the pain sometimes. There's the saint, that little goody-goody who always does everything right. Now, goody-goody sounds awful, but I bet that's what the siblings call them. What about this one, Daddy's little princess? They can be horribly spoilt. Maybe this is a good moment to say, You love your child with everything you have and they're the best kid in the world. Not everybody thinks that. They may be terribly spoilt. They may be robbed of their childhood, being a sensible little adult. And then as they grow up, dads, I want you to just think about this a little bit, because I've seen this happen. Sometimes the affections that should be going towards that little princess's mother, you start giving to your teenage daughter, and your marriage starts to suffer. And it's just going to be verbalisation of you're lovely or you're clever. Your wife needs to hear that too. And what about mummy's little man? That is really tough. How many times have I heard that in a broken marriage? And that poor little boy who's 8 in bed at night thinking, how can I pay the bills that mummy talks about? That often happens in a single family. But parenting can be good. I'm just pointing out some of the things here that can make it difficult. God wants his children to become free and independent. God has no grandchildren. And we need to get a revelation of that, because we actually do believe, I think deep down, I did, that our kids are God's grandchildren, really. But they are his children. And as much as you love your kids, God loves them more. So he has no grandchildren. Here's something for you to remember. We had one of our children seemed like a major ring-in. I'm not going to tell you which one that was of my 3 children, but one just seemed so different from Rob and I. He was always lying on the couch.
She just eliminated the girl, by the way.
He was always lying on the couch. And we'd say, get up and do something. Actually, when I look back, he was probably a gift to us, teaching us to slow down and back off a little bit, because we were all go, 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 go. But where did this boy come from? He was not mixed up in the hospital. He looks like me. Oh, there's another elimination. He looks like me, probably acts like me, except I'm more go, 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 go.
He's got more tats than you.
He's got a lot more tats than me, covered. You know what he said to me? Oh, not so long ago, he said, oh, Mum, he said, I wish I could get rid of all these tats. I went, oh, darling, because I used to moisturise his skin and, powder his little bottom, and I just kept him out of the sun. I said, I'm thinking, oh, those tats. And he goes, you know what, I'd start all over again with a blank canvas. He just loves them. He just loves them. Anyway, where am I? Oh, my 3 children and your children actually have 4 grandparents. Maybe you should stop sometimes and just consider, are they like any of their grandparents? I have a little granddaughter who's got a nose like mine. It's always a little bit of a talking point. And I told her the other day, it's a beautiful nose, Mia. It is the most beautiful nose. But if you've got a child that you're going, where did that kid come from exactly? Consider the 4 grandparents. Moving right along. We're moving on to the 5 love languages. I think most of you know them. Words of affirmation. Who doesn't crave good words? Words of affirmation that are going to build them up. Less criticism. More affirming. What do they say? I don't know what the ratio. It's a crazy ratio. Is it 10 good words and 1 negative word? The next one, physical touch. Cuddle your kids. Cuddle them, cuddle them, cuddle them. Give them a squeeze. Touch them. Let them know they're special. What about this one? Quality time. Oh. Everybody craves quality time, but especially your kids. And this is one of the things that I think, looking back on the raising of my 3 children, this would be one thing that I would change. Oh, hello, Joel. There's my son at the back door. I've told him he's not allowed to laugh or he's not allowed to cough loudly when he thinks, Mum, you're sounding like a hypocrite here. That's not what you did. Quality time, that's what I would do a little bit differently. I would listen a whole lot more to my kids. I would put down even the potato peeler, or I would put down the newspaper, or I would put down the magazine, or I would stop folding up the washing. Now that was in my day, These days, and we're going to just come up to this soon, we're living in the 21st century. I today would put down my mobile phone. Hello, Wanda. I today would put down my tablet. I today would put down my iPad and I would give them that old-fashioned eye contact. And I would listen with both my ears, because what they're telling you they consider important. Gifts. You don't have to buy expensive gifts for your kids. They can be just little gifts, but a gift. But don't ever substitute a gift for your time, for your listening, for your playing a game with your kids. Don't ever substitute a gift with that. And I've seen it happen time and time again because it's a guilt offering almost. And when your child makes you a gift, you must appreciate it, because your child cannot go to the shops and buy you a present. They have spent time with the only thing they have is paper and pencils or a bit of cardboard and cellophane. Don't ever fob it off as, oh, stupid thing that is. Don't ever. They have done that as a precious gift to you. And the other thing, kind actions. Gifts of service. Fix your kid's flat tyre. Imagine having your car parked in the garage with a flat tyre. Fix their flat tyre. Or what about painting? Painting their doll's house or something. Kind actions. And that's another thing that I think we must teach our children, don't know if it comes under the love languages, is forgiveness. Teach them how to forgive. Offer your forgiveness to them when you're not listening or when you've said something wrong. Teach them to receive it and teach them how to give it. I've got to move along. What have I got? 5 minutes left? Okay. Rob advertised this as parenting in the 21st century. And I went, oh my goodness. I lost sleep over this. I've got another half of a sermon written that I've ditched, because we are living in the 21st century. This is a whole new kettle of fish, like I was just saying about, put down the magazine or the newspaper. Put down your cell phone. Children are becoming addicted to maybe not their phone, maybe yours. Oh, my kids don't have cell phones. Oh, they pretty much have yours to play with all the time. They are becoming addicted to it, or tablets, or whatever it is. Are they addicted to it? Take it away from them. Take their cell phone away from them and see what happens. Listen with 2 ears, what I was saying, listen carefully. Listen to what they say. Watch their tanty. I've seen them in my grandchildren. Watch their actions. Oh, but my kids aren't addicted. Watch them. I'm going to read. Now, look, I'm going to say that this book, and I am speaking a lot out of this book. Hello, can we have a picture of this? Where do I put that?
No.
Or not? We can't do that. This book is called Digital Cocaine. Oh, maybe we do. Is that right? I can't see. No. Anyway, it's called Digital Cocaine. I would recommend that every person here go and get that book. You may not agree with every part of it, but there will be a lot in it that you like, and you'll go, yes. It actually talks about parenting. He actually says about confrontation is part of parenting. Because when you start to say to your child, that's enough on that tablet or on that iPad, and they throw, it's a tanty when they're little. When they start displaying rage and anger, you are going to have to fight for them. You are going to have to confront this issue. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, oh, Debbie, what's all this about addiction of the phone? I've said, take it off them and watch their response. And this is probably going to get harder and harder. On the cover is a very respectable looking, I think 14 or 15-year-old young man. And if you can see that, he's actually snorting all that he can out of the cell phone, which will be websites, you know, the internet, telephone numbers, conversations, all of that. If you are a grandparent and you're sitting there thinking, oh, I don't need that book, I'm past all the kids, you need to start helping in your relationship with your grandchildren and your children. This is going to be a war. Our children are becoming like robots. They're losing touch of love and being connected to family. I'm going to say a little story here that happened a couple of weeks ago. I haven't checked with my daughter to say this, but one little grandson of mine, I won't say her son, my grandson, was called in after school and had to have a little meeting with the teacher and with Mum. Anyway, Mum comes back. I said, how did that go? And she said, oh, do you know what he did? And most of you will know who I'm talking about, 7-year-old. The teacher laid down a few rules, and this is what he did. I was mortified. I thought, how disrespectful to the teacher. If my kid had done that, and my son standing at the door, he'd probably think, yeah, I know what would have happened. And then very quickly I realised he was speaking the language of a 7-year-old in 2019. Do you know how I knew that? He was actually hanging his head, probably in a bit of sorrow. Let's not say shame, but sorrow. And here's the thumb. But worse than that, really, our kids, our little kids and our older kids, all they're seeing is this bit, the hand and the thumb. They're not even seeing what's attached to the hand and the thumb. Like. He was actually saying to the teacher, okay, I get it, I'll change. So there is a language developing for the kids of today. I want to read just something quickly out of this book. I'm going to read a page, and this is for you to deal with what you think. You might say, what a lot of rubbish. And that's okay, you can think that. I'm just going to put it out there. Did you ever use a timeout as a discipline method for your children? How many times more recently have you handed your child a screen when they were acting out as opposed to sending them to timeout? Common Sense Media reports that 72% of children under the age of 8. Now this is 2013, so we're a long way past that. 72% of children under the age of 8 have used a mobile device. 38% of children under the age of 2 have used one. In 2011, only 8% of all families owned a tablet device such as an iPad. That figure jumped to 40% in 2013. Imagine what it is now, maybe 70%, I would think, maybe more. Clearly, a child's exposure to screens is inevitable, but is it wise to use it for daycare? This guy, Brad Huddleston, he's got a degree in computer science. So this is someone that just hasn't got a bee in his bonnet about this stuff. And he says that his business couldn't operate with all our computers and iPads and tablets. What he's talking about in this is addiction and the need to have it 24/7. Now this, I just want to read this bit. Steve Jobs' kids. Now Steve Jobs, he's the founder and CEO of Apple. Have you ever looked at that apple symbol? There's an apple with a bite out of it. I don't know, maybe they're talking about the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know. But anyway, it says here, given the global dominance of technology giant Apple, one might have assumed that Apple founder and CEO Steve Jobs' children would have more technology at their disposal than any kid on the planet. When the iPad was first rolling out in 2010, technology columnist Nick Bolton, writing for the New York Times, must have been shocked by Jobs' answer to his questions. So your kids must love the iPad. Jobs' reply was, they haven't used it. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. My eyebrows nearly went through the roof when I read that. Walter Isaacson, the author of Steve Jobs, spent a good bit of time in Jobs' home and said this about what he observed. Every evening, Steve made a point of having dinner at the big long table in their kitchen discussing books and history and a variety of things, Isaacson said. No one ever pulled out an iPad or a computer. The kids did not seem addicted at all to devices. So if you're like me, you must have several questions running through your mind right now. What does Steve Jobs know that I don't? Why did Steve Jobs market these devices to my children when he would severely limit his own children's use? Should there be a label, a warning label, on the back of each one? Well, that doesn't make money, does it? I'm just going to move on to page... That was 102. If you buy the book, you'll be able to read that for yourself. I was just alarmed at some of this stuff, you know. Now, I've said you are to discern and work this out for yourself and where this fits in with your family. As someone with a computer science degree, I do believe they know something that many others don't. I can tell you firsthand just how stressed the brain can become from hours spent with computers. I reckon after 1 hour with a digital device, after a digital device, your adrenal glands, your adrenal system starts to kick into overload. Where am I up to? I can tell you firsthand just how stressed the brain can become from hours spent with computers. And that's from doing productive work. How much time is spent online being unproductive? Regardless of the type of digital activity, it all takes a heavy toll on you, and even more so on your underdeveloped adolescent brain. This is if you're a teenager. Following is more that Nick discovered. Alex Shi Constantinople, the chief executive of tech-focused communications and marketing firm Outcast Agency, never allows her 5-year-old to use gadgets during the week. Her other children, aged 12 and 10, are allowed only 30 minutes a day on school nights. Evan Williams is a founder of Twitter and blogger and Medium. He and his wife said that in lieu of iPads, their 2 young sons have hundreds of traditional books that they are welcome to pick up and read any time. Leslie Gold, founder and chief executive of the Sunderland Gold Group, a tech media relations and analytics company, has a strict no screen time during the week of our kids. And went on to acknowledge that as her children get older, allowances need to be made when the school requires them to use a computer. Chris Anderson is the former editor of Wired and now chief executive of 3D Robotics. This is rule number 1. There are no screens in the bedroom. Period. Ever. Full stop. As you recall, Steve Jobs made a point of having dinner with his children at a big long table in their kitchen, discussing books, history and a variety of things. What about Bill Gates? Bill and Melinda Gates set a time limit of 45 minutes a day of total screen time for games and an hour a day on weekends. Additional computer time is granted for homework. This is just meant to be challenging because this talk is about parenting in the 21st century. Now, I can say that we always, as a family, had tea at the tea table. I would encourage you to do that and talk about what went on in your kid's day. That's something that I think we got right. And bring back some of these board games. You know, this is Chinese checkers. They are awesome sitting on the floor or sitting around the table. We had a bit of more of probably a retro game, I would say, 30 years ago. And Rob would play too. Sore loser. He'd sit there and count how many moves it was going to take to win the game. If he wasn't going to win, it got upended as he went to get a coffee or something. But other than those issues, bring back some board games. The World Health Organization has said that under the year of 5, there are 42 billion children, 42 billion in this world, that are overweight or obese. Turn off those screens and get outside and play cricket or walk on the beach. If you're broke, go and buy a box of ice creams from Coles and walk on the beach, walk in the reserves. You don't want to have fat, obese children, and you want to have people, you want to develop your children into adults that know how to relate. Because all this stuff, like, I'll tell you something. Hang on, I might just talk about this a little bit. Sorry, Rob, I'm a bit disorganised, I know. Am I coping all right
here? No different to home, love.
That's right. I want to talk to you about bullying. This is something of the 21st century. Bullying is a shocking thing. One big bully. I know. They pick on kids that are generally smaller than them. They can't defend themselves. They either don't defend themselves and then are crushed for I don't know how long, or if they retaliate, because of in the, I'll just have to say organisations these days, they're wanting to push a moral equivalence on everybody. If the victim retaliates, somehow, I have seen it end up that they've been the worst. Somehow the bully gets let off and the victim cops it twice. Now that is a shocking thing. And if you are a parent, you get involved. I'm all for kids fighting out their battles and things, but not when that sort of thing starts happening. I'll tell you what I did, but this was a long time ago. This was 20 years ago, and I don't know how that would happen, what would happen these days. My kid, he was 4 on the bus, and we lived in Corro, and they had a free bus system for a little while. And it was 2 bus stops they could get closer to our home. And I thought that's some good responsibility for them, because parking at Corro School was just a nightmare. There was this kid in year 7 picking on my kid. Pick, got worse. Now my son is standing at the back door there smiling. It was him. He was sitting there getting picked on by this kid. The bus pulled up. I stormed onto the bus. I stopped the bus. I looked at the bus driver. He looked up in his big, rear vision mirror. Mike, you're a bus driver. And I let that kid have it. And nobody said anything to me. I told him to stop picking on my kid. He had a very unfortunate surname. I said, "What's your name?" Now that is a very unfortunate name in this predicament. But he did stop. He stopped picking on my kid. So I'm saying to you, if you are parents, I don't know how you do that these days, because there's a whole lot of different legalities going on. And then there's cyberbullying. You know what? Google dangerous apps. There are so many apps now that you can send these awful texts and pictures or whatever anonymously. There's Snapchat, and people think that's something that just lasts there for a few seconds. That can be moved over into, I think it's, Snapchat Saver, Snapbox or something. They can be saved, those things. And if your kid is being cyberbullied, that's the new word, I don't get it. Block the number, delete the number, take the phone off your kid, give them one of those flip phones. They're called a dumb phone because they can't connect to internet or anything. Help your child. So this is what's going on in 2011. 21st century. I've been looking at that book. Get a flip phone for them. They're still going to have a phone, but they're going to be safer. Now, I know you're sitting there saying, but Debbie, this is the 21st century. Get with it. Do keep your kids safe. Now, about 10 years or 8 years ago, I myself was caught up in some cyberbullying. But I was 50. And I didn't really know. It was a Facebook group. It's probably why I don't really love Facebook. I don't gravitate towards any of that stuff. It was a group of absolutely hate Debbie. I don't know what they were saying about me. That was the best thing. But eventually somebody came to me and they said, I want you to know that this is going on. Now, I don't know to this day if that person was part of the group and they were saying this out of conviction, or it was just a repulsion of when they heard about it. So, this goes on. It was 10 years ago and I handled it as a 50-year-old, and I could do that very successfully. I know totally who I am in Christ Jesus. I know that I am totally loved by the Father, and boo-hoo to anybody else. But if I had been 10 or 13 or 16 and they were doing a character assassination of me, I don't know how I would have handled that. It's different today. Your kids have access to these phones. Now, probably the reason I don't know what that's like as a 10 or a 15-year-old is because back in those days, a cell phone wasn't invented. The internet wasn't invented. There were no tablets. There were no iPads. But there is today. How am I going for time?
Oh, you're about 20 minutes over.
All right. Our kids are living in the 21st century. I should look at some notes, really. 70% of school shootings, overseas and where it's all happening, 75% of those with the guns shoot all those kids. They were bullied at school. If your kid's bullied and you deal with it, just watch out for any post-traumatic stress that might be lingering, that needs to be dealt with. 69% of children over 13, this is back in 2013, have experienced cyberbullying. So it's probably like 85% now. 29% of them were forced to stay away from school because of it. There is an epidemic in the world. The kids are sleep deprived. Under 6, a kid's meant to have about 12 hours of sleep every single night. Over 6, they're meant to have 11 hours of sleep every night. Australia rates 5th in the world of being sleep deprived, our kids. One more other thing about all our digital things that we have. There was an ad-on recently. I can't remember what it was. Don't know if it was for the NBN or some sort of cabling. But every person in the rooms of the house was doing something different. And they were saying, we can fix up your NBN or your cabling or whatever it was. I don't remember what it was exactly. But the thing I noticed, that the family was so isolated and disjointed. Turn off all your gadgets, even for an hour. No gadgets between 7 and 8. Or maybe only 1 hour between 7 and 8 we can do this. Get back to the old-fashioned board games. And I think, I've got another thing here to do. Do I have to finish? I do. Okay. Train up a child in the way they should go. And when they are old, they will not part from it. It says, train them up. You will need to be the parent. You do not need to be your child's friend only. You need to be the parent. I remember back when I was 13, Dr. Spock. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, some child psychologist. Had got my mum, when she read the book, for me to call her Lorraine. And it broke my heart, and I did it once and I never did it again. Your child needs parents. And part of being a parent, you have to confront. And every day when you wake up, you ask the question, am I leading or am I following my kid? Who's leading, me or my kid? Okay, here we go. I'm going to finish up with this. If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with fear, he learns to be apprehensive. Or what about if a child lives with pity, they learn to feel sorry for themselves. If a child lives with ridicule, they learn to be shy. If a child lives with jealousy, they learn to feel envy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. But this is what we need to do. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, they learn to be confident. If a child lives with praise, they learn to be appreciative. If a child lives with acceptance, they learn to love. If a child lives with approval, they learn to like themselves. If a child lives with honesty, they learn what truth is. And if a child lives with fairness, they learn justice. If a child lives with recognition, they learn to have a goal. If a child lives with sharing, they learn to be generous. If a child lives with security, they learn to have faith in themselves and those about them. If a child lives with friendliness, he learns the world is a nice place to live in. So, as at the beginning, I said the prayer, God, help. That needs to be your prayer too. Or maybe a prayer like this. Pray this with your children at night time. Ask them how their day went. But dear God, thank you that you're my Heavenly Father. Thank you for being in my life, in my room and everywhere I go. I know that you're always with me and will never leave me. I commit myself to you and ask for your protection. I choose to trust you. I know that if I'm ever afraid, I can always call on you to protect me. I ask you to protect me tonight as I sleep. Please bless and protect my family and home. I love you, and I pray this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.
Well done. You can take the mess. All right, I've got 3 minutes to wind up. There's a heap of good stuff in that, obviously. I've actually blown my iPad time while she's been talking, though. That's the trouble. But that's all right. I want to finish with one point that I think is vitally important and very relevant to the 21st century. And if you forget all of Deb's stuff, please remember this. This is really important. I told you I was going to have the last say. In most cultures, there's this thing called a rite of passage. Some of you might be familiar with it. So a rite of passage is a period in a young person's life where they transition from one stage of life to the next. One of the dangers of the 21st century is that we've forgotten what a rite of passage is, and we've forgotten how well it serves to develop that young person into adulthood. So there are actually several rites of passage, and I'm not going to unpack all of this. We might do that next time we do one of these mornings. But a rite of passage is basically a ritual, or it's a test that sometimes is painful, actually, and difficult. And in ancient cultures, there was often very painful and difficult. There was spears and, bloodshedding and all sorts of things that I don't suggest as a good idea. But nonetheless, the pain and the difficulty of a rite of passage is that the child's giving up something and growing into something as well. And unfortunately, in the 21st century, we've clouded these things. The transitions aren't clear. They're kind of assumed. And there's a lot of reasons why this has happened. And so rites of passage are important because they provide healthy transitions for a child to move from infancy to childhood, from childhood to adolescence, from adolescence to adulthood. And unfortunately today, what we often see with young kids, and again, this is my grandfatherly observation more than anything, is that young people are clouded in those transitions, and it's contributing very strongly to a very immature society. And so you guys are going to be ahead of the game on this. You're going to have a head start over the rest of the world, and your kids are going to be awesome if you take this thing to heart. There are many unhelpful traits of the 21st century, and a lot of them have come about because kids are not growing up. In Hebrews 5, verse 13 and 14, it says, anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And so when we don't give our kids rites of passage, they stay as kids. They don't really grow up. And it stuns me the number of, and there's probably some in this room, so I'm going to be a bit politically correct. There are some people in their 40s and 50s that are still so addicted to some of the stuff Deb's talking about with video games and so forth, which is weird because they haven't really grown up. In 1 Corinthians 13, verse 13, it says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish ways behind me. The implication there is that the person the Apostle Paul is talking about, and he's speaking generally, is that these are people that are actually growing up. They're transitioning. They're leaving behind parts of their childhood. Now, I can't speak to the issues of girls as well as I can to boys, for obvious reasons. We had two girls, we had two boys, and we had one girl that turned out more like me than the other two boys. So I didn't do a great job of raising girls. And so I'm not going to be presumed to be an expert on girls. And in fact, the older I get, the more I realise the less I know about the females. All right? So cut me a bit of slack on that. But in Western culture, we generally don't have tests for boys as they grow up, and so they don't really become men often. Boys are no longer required to prove that they're emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or physically strong enough to take on a world that's hostile. Because in essence, we've failed as parents. When I say we, I'm speaking about the world generally. When boys and girls hit puberty, they change physically, but often they don't change emotionally. Boys' bodies grow. Some of us get chest hair. Our voices deepen, and then they break up. You know that growing up thing. Our muscles grow, and we get more toned and cut. And then we think we're a man. We develop all the physical signs of being mature men, but we don't grow up mentally and emotionally. That's part of the problem. Now, it was a problem when I was a kid, obviously. But it's a bigger problem nowadays for all the reasons that Deb has mentioned. Because we're not actually leading our kids, they're leading us. Ultimately, our attitudes and our knowledge, our IQ and our EQ, which is often underestimated, that's the emotional quotient. Our speech and the way we behave proves that we're not real men. Again, there is another story for the women, and you'll have to translate that for yourself. You see, physique doesn't matter when it comes to being a real man. I know that size matters and all those things that we all talk about. But some men are physically masculine, big guys, but when you get to know them, they're actually immature little boys who haven't grown up at all. Other guys don't look like they're finished, skinny little drinks of water, as my mother used to call them. And yet, when you talk to them, it's like talking to the President of the United States. Probably not the current one, if you don't like Trump, although I do like Trump. There you go. These are men in little boys' bodies, and that's great, because we can't help our bodies. I mean, I've been going to the gym for years, and it hasn't done a thing. So we can't really help our bodies. Often the difference is that their parents have understood the principle of a rite of passage. And guys, I want you to understand this morning, because as I said before, if you understand it, you will be way ahead of the game, because the world has no idea what we're talking about. You see, there is a difference between men and boys. Some would say the only difference between men and boys is the cost of their toys, and there is some truth in that. But there are some differences. Men are selfless, boys are selfish. Really, it doesn't matter how old you are, this still applies. Men are temperate, boys are hot-headed. Men own responsibility, boys deny it. Men see danger, boys are blind to it. Men take care of women, boys chase after them. Men stand up for others. Boys bully. Again, Deb spoke about that. Men think for themselves and take action. Boys follow the crowd. But you see, what we have to do is we've got to help boys become men, girls become women. It doesn't just happen. There is a rite of passage at every one of those transition points. Don't treat all your children the same. This is one of the big things of the 21st century that parents are doing. Little Johnny, who's 3, gets the same pocket money as little Jilly, who's 15. And if little Jilly gets to go out with her friends, then little Johnny should be allowed to as well. Because we've got no concept of rite of passage. Again, I'm an old man. I get to sit down and observe people lots. And I see parents doing this all the time, treating children of all ages the same. Now, most people have got more than one child. Not always, but most. In fact, 2.3 is the average still, or 2.4. People are having a few more. So some people have got 3. We had 3 kids. It's vitally important, guys, that we treat children differently. That we remember that a 3-year-old is a 3-year-old. And they don't become a 7-year-old until they're 7. I mean, this is not rocket science. How do we help kids grow up before they grow old? Well, we've got to be intentional about helping boys become men and girls become women. And there's a few tips that we can do, that we can take in hand to do this. First of all, again, Deb spoke about our habit of sitting around the table and talking. This is a great thing to do. Have family rituals. Create rites of passage as children grow into those important age groups. And there are many of them. There's a 12-13 one, which is really important. Then there's the 16 one, where they think they're adults and they're not quite adults and they struggle with being torn between two worlds. There's a rite of passage there waiting to happen. And particularly for you men, the best thing you can do for your young son or daughter at that age is affirm their adulthood and encourage them to grow up. Take them with you on a trip. Take your daughter out on a date. Treat her like a lady at that point. Begin to care for them in different ways. Make a formal occasion where something more than just a physical gift is given to them, where you actually give them a privilege that they weren't able to have before that point. You see, if we treat all our children the same, those privileges don't happen. And unfortunately, they never really grow up. They never really make the transition. Help them understand the rights and responsibilities that come with leaving 15-year-oldhood and entering 16-year-oldhood. Then there's another change point at 18, obviously. And when I was a boy, there was another one at 21. I think nowadays we should have another one at 30, because young boys are just not growing up nowadays. As I said before, don't treat all the children the same. They all have different ages and different maturity levels. And I want to say this loud and clear, socialism makes a terrible parent. You see, we've learnt all the bad habits from things like that, where everybody gets treated equal in the hope that we create this utopian family. It just doesn't happen. And so sometimes we think we're being fair, and what we're actually doing is hampering the growth of our children. And so this takes a lot of thought. Start reading those books, by the way. That's a really helpful thing to do. We've got to allow children to progress through the key transitions. And as they grow through these markers, we've got to learn to give them rights at that point and then ask for responsibilities and make sure they understand the consequences of getting those things wrong. Again, we don't do that well in this world because we've been taught that we can't say negative things about our children. You see, sometimes there is a case for negative reinforcement. Don't use it too often. And finally, don't be a rescuer. As children grow into the new stages of their life, as they transition and have a rite of passage to the next stage of life, don't rescue them every time they fail. Because they will fail. Deb mentioned that when she started. This world sets us up for failure. And if we're going to create young men and women out of our children, they have to be exposed to reality. Now, we put in safety nets and all those things, and everybody has a different level of safety nets. I understand that. But they've got to learn that there is a consequence for every action. So don't rescue them from the consequences of making bad choices. You see, what Deb and I are really saying this morning is that you and I never cease to be parents. We never cease to be parents. We've been married 41 years. Our oldest son's 36. He's the one laughing up the back there as we're talking. 37, actually. And so we've learnt some of these lessons, but we've never stopped being their parents. And you'll never stop being their parents, because a rite of passage eventually will bring them into a relationship where they become your peer, but you're still their parent. And it's important for them. I remember my dad, and as he got in older years, I really valued the relationship we had. He passed away when he was 83, and we still had a great relationship. But he was still my dad. And what he said went. If he suggested something, I fell in behind him because he'd shown me through life how to grow up. And so, guys, we never will stop being parents. We have a God-given responsibility to ultimately grow our kids into healthy, functional adults. Don't let them do that too soon either, because a rite of passage holds back some privileges until they get to those trigger points. So again, we've given you a lot to think about this morning. And we're not going to go any further. I'm going to keep my time to a strict limit, and I'm not going to make a mess of my pulpit. You've just had an insight into family life. Why don't you come up and help me minister, Deb? Everybody stand up. We're done.